Hello friends, I'm here to discuss a topic that is why taxation system is so complicated, especially when we are talking about United States, why it's complicated. It takes less than 5 minutes and approximately $0 to file taxes in Estonia, the country with the best tax structures in the world, according to a blog called Tax Foundation. The country's revenue department developed a web-based system where every citizen has a personal tax account that automatically pre-fills tax information like salary, child-related deductions, and tax liability. Oh my God, what a beautiful thing. I really checked it. Altogether, it takes less than 5 minutes. It's wonderful. So basically, I just logged in, I checked that all information was correct, and yes, it was. Now, this is not the case when Americans file. Taxpayers in the United States spend an average of 13 hours preparing their tax returns, and they pay approximately $2 to $40 for tax preparation services. Last year, they also waited 22 minutes on average to ask IRS a question, that is, if they were to call 10% of callers who made it through to a live agent at the underfunded and understaffed agency. In short, our tax system has created an ecosystem where filing taxes is confusing, expensive, and time consuming. So why is the US tax law and filing system so burdensome on taxpayers and agency? Because the US tax system is trying to do more than collect taxes, according to experts. Congress uses the tax system as a tool to achieve economic and social goals and then relies on beleaguered IRS to execute those plans. Congress, in writing the law, tried to build into a code incentives for social benefits. So, for example, to enable parents to work, the CTC, the child tax credit, was introduced. So, once you start supplementing taxable income, that's where things start getting complex. Otherwise, tax code in America wasn't always this complicated. As a country that evolved from an uprising over a tea tax, a rallying cry of no taxation without representation, the United States couldn't get a federal income tax to stick for a long time. President Lincoln created the first version of a federal income tax to pay for the Civil War in 1862, according to the IRS, some 86 years ago after the country's founding. It was repealed 10 years later, however, and was revived in 1894 under the Wilson Tariff Act, which also created an income tax division within the Bureau of Internal Revenue. But the Supreme Court struck down the income tax a year later. It wasn't until the Wyoming finally ratified the 16th Amendment in 1913, as the First World War loomed, that Congress had the power to collect income taxes from individuals and corporations. The US later enacted a 1% tax on net personal income of more than $3,000 and a surtax of 6% on the incomes of more than $5 lakh. There's a vintage illustration that features Boston Tea Party, a political protest that occurred on December 16th, 1773 at Griffin's Wharf in Boston, Massachusetts. Next is the first Form 1040 debated, ushering in the start of tax filing as we know it today. Then came the expansion of the tax system. President Roosevelt's Victory Tax in 1942 created a progressive tax system by introducing a wealth tax, increasing the number of taxpayers by lowering exemptions and launching provisions for medical and dental expenses. The highest marginal tax rate reached 94% in 1944. Just imagine, 94%. Subsequent administrations seesawed between different and sometimes conflicting policies, like the Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981 under President Ronald Reagan reduced individual tax rates. Then came President Bill Clinton. He raised the top tax rate for high income earners, and he expanded the Earned Income Tax Credit, the EITC. The TCJA, the Tax Cuts Jobs Act, under President Donald Trump, lowered statutory rates and it increased the standard deduction. Then most recently, the Inflation Reduction Act under President Joe Biden, it provided clean energy tax breaks. So as messy as the democratic political process is these days, we also have a messy tax system. Says who? Daniel Bunn, President and CEO of Tax Foundation. So everybody agrees that you should have you should tax your enemies and subsidize your friends. That's the problem. That's the problem, really. I repeat, everybody agrees that you should tax your enemies and subsidize your friends. Tax and policy goals in the United States. What happens with taxes and the policy goals? In the US, the policymakers rely on the progressive tax system to achieve many goals, like encouraging the retirement saving, subsidizing childcare, or pushing forward the environmental initiatives through any of the array of deductions or environmental credits or related credits. So the challenge is, if you are going to use the code for many purposes, that's where you will lose the simplicity. It's very simple. It's a delicate balancing act that the Congress or the Internal Revenue Code is trying to do. We need to understand that. President Joe Biden speaks about the Inflation Reduction Act of 2002 at the White House on July 28, 2022. However, cutting out credits and deductions to simplify the tax code is far from easy. It's very difficult. Why? Because strong interest groups would battle to keep what works for their constituents. The powerful real estate lobby, for example, it kept the mortgage interest deduction off the chopping block for many years. So, point is, comparing lobby groups have also added a layer of complication to the tax code as they campaign for dozens and dozens of separate policies. Correct? For instance, I'll tell you, when the corporate tax rate was slashed under TCJA in 2017, the reform could have encouraged different entities to incorporate due to beneficial new lower tax regime. The decreased rate should have flushed out a variety of business entities that would want to convert to corporations and take advantage of the new tax rate. But instead, what happened? Instead, certain interest groups representing the S corporations and pass-through entities asked for and received special deductions. We also have a lot of policies that are either meant to encourage certain activity or discourage certain activity if it's not clear at all points what you are trying to do. The complicated tax system has also spawned an entire industry of tax software companies accused of lobbying the government to keep tax filing expensive and complicated. It's difficult to hear, but that's true. I mean, that is one of the side why things are complicated, why they are kept complicated. The struggle between complexity and resources, in addition to a complex tax system, is an agency ill prepared to fulfill many responsibilities. One of the most frustrating aspects of the tax filing system is challenges and contacting the IRS for assistance. Says who? Says Eric Bronekant, a CP and a CFP with more than 20 years of experience. A big area of challenge for taxpayers is resolving problems. In stark contrast to the average United States taxpayers' experience with the IRS, Estonians, people of Estonia, they expect calls to their tax service to be picked up right away. Like once, in one case, when one person complained to the ministry that he called and he wasn't answered in a minute. Oh my God, they expect to get answered in a minute, but that expectation is futile when it comes to United States or countries like India. But the problem is that the IRS is more than just a tax revenue collector. As I told you earlier, it does much more than collecting tax revenues. It's also a welfare provider through its social security management infrastructure. It's a stimulus distributor like the one it did during the COVID crisis, and it's also a tax cop. It catches the tax thieves. So, a facade of branch. That's it. We'll continue this lecture in the future podcasts. Thank you.